Hi, it's Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, once again with my pans and plans. I started my last one with a big smile because the House had passed the American Rescue Act, but now it is signed by the President as of right at this moment. This is huge. It's going to make such a difference in the lives of people. Just one example, it will cut child poverty in half. Think about that. And I've heard that 25 to 30% of Americans will be lifted out of poverty. And I also heard that checks are going to be for direct deposit in the mail as early as this weekend. It is just so thrilling. This is the biggest, most important piece of legislation to help ordinary people that we've seen in literally decades, maybe all the way back to Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society and all the bills that passed back then. So it's very exciting. None of the Republicans voted for it, although Roger Wicker, Senator, was bragging about it yesterday and all the help that it gives to restaurants. But he voted against it. So I'm expecting that we'll see people from both sides of the aisle being at the ribbon cuttings of all the amazing projects. But I had 45 seconds to speak on the floor. So many people wanted to talk that they cut it short. So I wanted to tell you my speech because BBC World Service actually covered it, and there was some local news that covered it. This is what I said on the floor of the House, 45 seconds. This is a historic day. It is the beginning of the end of the great COVID depression. It also marks the end of the decades-long successful battle by big corporations and the super rich for trickle-down economics, the idea that when they get richer, that somehow everybody is going to benefit. Wrong. Today, we are putting money into the pockets of ordinary people, of poor people, and middle-class people, and they will be the engine that creates a healthy and prosperous future for us all. Anyway, that was what I just wanted to point out the contrast with what we've been seeing in the past. Big tax cuts for the rich during the Trump administration. $2 trillion, by the way. They're complaining about our rescue bill, $1.9 trillion. That's really going to help millions of people. And they did a bill to help the top 1% primarily. Really, 83% went to the top 1%. So I'm pretty ecstatic. I know that Speaker Pelosi gets a lot of credit, as well as the President of the United States, and Chuck Schumer doing a great job. So it's the law. This happened. Okay. I want to talk to you about some of the bills that have been going on, because the House has been doing its work on other fronts as well. And today, we voted on behalf of two bills that deal with gun violence. One is the very popular in the United States background checks, universal background checks. Right now you can go to a gun show in Indiana, you can lift the hood of your car, you can pile in guns, and you can drive back, and there they are, without a background check. Not anymore if we can get this passed in the Senate as well, which we should, because 80% of Americans think it's a good idea. Gun owners, NRA members, all think a universal background check is important. We wore these masks on the floor of the House. This represented a girl named Jamie. Her father, Fred Gutenberg, who has carried on her memory. She was killed in Parkland in that school shooting, and he wants everyone to remember her favorite color, which is orange. And the other bill that we passed to prevent gun violence is called the Charleston loophole that we closed. So you remember, I'm sure, the shooting and killing of 9 people at the Mother Emanuel Church. He went in and sat down with the people in prayer and ended up just shooting all of them. Well, the reason he was able to get a gun is that the current law says if they can't verify you and do a background check within 3 days, you get the gun. So this extends it at least till 10 days. So that's better. And had it been 10 days, this shooter, this murderer, would not have been able to have that gun that killed all those people. So there's 2 bills that passed. Obviously, it's just a beginning, but now our challenge is going to be to get it past the United States Senate. And let me just put it as an aside, and that's why we have to deal with the issue of the filibuster, because the idea of having to require 60 votes in order to pass any kind of legislation other than through reconciliation, the special process that we used for our big bill this time, then it'd be very hard. But so that's another issue. But we're at least on our way on the gun violence legislation. So the COVID pandemic has a birthday. It is 1 year ago today that we really realized that we had the pandemic. And in fact, it's 1 year ago today that Tony Fauci was testifying before an oversight committee and said that the worst is yet to come. And boy, was he right. The hundreds of thousands of people now who are dead in the United States of America. What happened was that same day, a basketball game was suddenly canceled because one of the players had COVID, and it wasn't long after that the NBA actually canceled the season. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. More vaccines are starting to get spread around the country and shots in people's arms, and that is a very good thing. We actually had kind of a little pizza party for members of Congress. You know, we all have gotten, whether you think that's fair or not, we all were offered anyway to have the vaccine. And so one of our members opened up the trunk of his car and had pizza. And I said to him, this is the best party I have ever been to in a year. Of course, it's the only party I was ever in a year. But it did feel good to be with some people. Not a huge crowd. There were less than 20 at a time that were gathered around. But there's a new guidance that says if you and other people, not big groups, but have been vaccinated, that you actually can get together, even maskless, and that you can, be with people who are unlikely to get the virus. So like grandchildren, I would recommend you still wear a mask, and certainly when you're going out, because it's not clear whether or not you can infect others. So masking, hand washing, all the things I've been nagging about are still in place. And so yesterday we saw 28 deaths in Illinois with a 7-day average of 31 deaths. Now, and we also saw 1,669 cases in Illinois for a 7-day average. Now that still sounds like a lot, but I want to tell you that 2 months ago, that average on January 10th was 7,026 for that week. So these numbers are going down. I've been very concerned that we have vaccine apartheid, meaning that poor countries are not able to produce their their own vaccines. They have gone to the World Trade Organization to ask for a waiver of what is called the TRIPS agreement, and it is being fought by Big Pharma. They wrote a letter to the president that we have to protect intellectual property, that is their ability to continue to make a profit so they can do research and development, which, by the way, you paid for most of it, for most of the vaccines and therapeutics. I'm trying very hard to help the 100-some countries be able to have a waiver and permission that during the virus they're going to be able to produce their own vaccines and distribute them, and that it can't be profits over people. So I also wanted to tell you about my story for Women's History Month. So I want you to think for a second, who do you think is the first woman of color in the United States House of Representatives? I hear people saying Shirley Chisholm. Wrong. The woman's name is Patsy Mink. Have you ever heard of her? Patsy Mink was a third-generation Japanese-American living in Hawaii. A smart cookie, if you don't mind my saying that, because she was able to apply and be accepted to the University of Chicago. Go UC. So proud. And she became a lawyer. Problem was, when she went back to Hawaii, she, because of discrimination, she wasn't able to get a job. But she ended up getting involved in Democratic politics. And she ended up being in, now remember, when Patsy was born in the 1920s, Hawaii was not a state of the Union. So for the government in Hawaii, she became a member of their House, a member of their Senate. So Hawaii became a state in 1959, and Patsy Mink ran for the United States House of Representatives in 1964, becoming the first woman of color, any color, in the House of Representatives. How come you never heard of her? Some of you may have heard of her. I'm determined that we're going to hear about her. She was a founder of KPAC, which is really our Asian caucus, and I want to work with them to make sure that there's at the very least a portrait of Patsy Mink in the House or in the Capitol building. I think she deserves recognition. So she was a champion of Title IX. Title IX gives equity for girls and women in sports and in education. It's an enormous advance in human rights. I had the pleasure of serving with Patsy Mink. Oh, but there was a lot before that, because Patsy actually ran for president of the United States. Yes, she did. She didn't win. And then she ran for the United States Senate and lost in the primary. So, but she came back in 1990, and I arrived about almost 10 years later, and there was this bitty little woman who was as feisty as she could possibly be. And I kind of hung out with her as much as I could, just listening to her when she would speak on the floor and all the passion that she had. You know, Title IX was not the easiest thing to implement. There were a lot of coaches around the country, for example, who didn't think that women should have equality when it comes to funding sports. Anyway, Patsy was fantastic, and I am determined to raise her profile so everybody knows about her. And it's a really important time to do that, because I want to tell you that Asian Americans are seeing a huge spike in hate crimes. People are like blaming them for COVID. You know, to many white Americans in particular, all Asians are Chinese, and China started it all, and there have been assaults and even people who have died because of those assaults. So I want Patsy to be our standard bearer. So also to celebrate Women's History Month, we're going to next week pass a resolution declaring it and celebrating it. And also, we are going to be voting on the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA. And it takes 38 states in order to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And we were 3 states short. They were Virginia and Nevada and Illinois. I was there fighting in the 1980 to try and get that done, and we couldn't do it. But if we can extend the date, which is a thing that we can do in the Congress, and say that now that those states have ratified it, that we can move forward with the Equal Rights Amendment. So that would be super exciting. So these are much better times, and I am just hoping that all of those people who have been waiting for the promise that the President made, that help is on the way, to know it is really on the way now. I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching my video. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where my handle is @Jan Schakowsky.